Political sources tonight are Karen Finney, former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton, and Marc Short, former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Good to have you both. Marc, I was speaking, and you heard, to a Danish lawmaker earlier who said, listen, if the U.S. sends troops there, sends forces, this could be war. I mean, it's a remarkable thing to hear from a U.S. treaty ally about the U.S. Is that where we're heading here?
I don't think that's where we're heading. I don't think he has much choice but to answer it that way, Jim. But this is also nonsensical. I mean, in so many ways, the president could take a win because Greenland has, again, reiterated that you're welcome to expand your military bases here, where we once had 17 bases. You can do that. They've allowed access to a mine for rare earth minerals. And so this makes no sense. And the president's reaction makes even less sense, Jim, to say, I'm going to tax Americans another 10% until Denmark relents. It's like we're the ones paying the extra amount. And the whole idea that it would make further less sense is that if we're saying we need Greenland, which I think is we need to have access there is true, because I do think that Russia and China pose real threats. And they have continued to gain more and more territory in the Arctic. But if we're concerned about Russia there, why are we concerned about Russia and Ukraine?
Or why are we not concerned about strengthening relationships with Sweden and Finland, two NATO members that are actually Arctic powers? I mean, Karen, it doesn't make sense. And by the way, everybody says that.
Correct.
Even Republicans, whether they say it publicly, most are saying it privately. Yet, Trump is pushing forward.
Yes.
Should we realistically expect that to continue?
Yes, he is not on the reality bus. So it doesn't matter what makes sense or does not make sense. And I make light of it, but we were speaking earlier, reports from Davos suggest that there you have world leaders and business leaders from, globally having a conversation about how serious Trump might be about Greenland and what impact that could have on the economy. And they're asking the same question that Marc just posed. This doesn't make sense. The Greenlanders and Denmark would gladly give you whatever it is that you want. But this is part of Trump 2.0. Everything is a zero-sum game. Everything is, I have to own it. I have to control it. It is not about diplomacy. It is not about, again, our alliances. If we wanted to have a serious conversation about the Arctic, we could have that conversation, and that would probably be welcome. But that's not the path that he's taking.
And there's already a treaty that covers, in addition to the U.S. Military presence there. So after Trump issued this latest tariff threat, your former boss, Mike Pence, spoke to my colleague Jake Tapper. Have a listen to what he said.
I think it's a question right now, Jake, not of what the president's trying to accomplish, but how. And I have concerns about using what I think is a questionable constitutional authority, imposing unilateral tariffs on NATO allies to achieve this objective, as much as I've had concerns about the threat of a military invasion.
The Supreme Court, of course, has a vote in this and might very well deliver that vote this week and might tie Trump's hands. What happens if the Supreme Court rules against him on the way he's using these tariffs?
Well, I think that the Supreme Court will rule against the administration here. There's no president who's exerted this sort of tariff authority, and I think our founders were very clear the ability to tax Americans belongs with Congress. But, Jim, I do think that Congress has ceded a lot of other authorities to the executive branch. And so even if he loses his case, I expect the president to pivot to 232, to 301, to 122, and all these other mechanisms he has to continue the trade war.
That's the thing, because there's another way Congress could, of course, assert itself here, right?
Yes.
They could pass legislation
about
right?
that,
which I think is somewhere written in the Constitution about their powers. But they've also already written legislation to limit, for instance, the president's ability to remove forces from Europe, which is on the table here as a further way to cudgel against Europe. Do you see Congress stepping up?
Sure. But again, I think as we've seen time and time again over the past year, it doesn't seem to matter much to the president. He's even said in interviews last week with Steve Holland from Reuters, a very fine journalist, he doesn't care. The one other piece of this, though, that I think we should add, our own John King was just in Iowa and has done some great reporting. And it was so interesting to hear former Trump voters who said, I don't care about Greenland. No way, no how, I'm not interested. So the more he talks about it, the worse it is actually for Republicans and for anyone who has their name on a ballot this coming year. So at some point, that tension also will come into play.
And listen,
we'll
by the
see
way,
what they do.
to your point, tension, tariffs get passed on to consumers. There was a study out today that showed that 95% of those tariffs have not been passed on to consumers, not absorbed by corporations, and by the way, not paid for by foreign countries, as Trump has long complained they would. Is that eating into Republican support to a degree that at least the candidates, set aside Trump, know that that's a problem for them?
I think so, Jim. I think the reality is that the markets continue to stay at all-time highs. I think that what you've seen is that the inflation has peaked up in some places, but energy prices, the president, to his credit, has lowered significantly, and so that's not severe. But I think where you're seeing it is honestly in the employment numbers. You continue to see unemployment continue to tick up, and I think that for some of the president's strongest supporters in the heartland, the farmers of America, they're the ones that are feeling this impact most. And so, I think as you look toward the midterms, I think it is a concern for a lot of elected Republicans in territories that you would suspect would be reliably red.
Yeah. Karen, but are Democrats showing an alternative enough to voters, or are they just sitting back and saying, as they've done in the past, not with the greatest success, saying Trump will be his own downfall? Yeah,
look, I think our own CNN polling has pointed out to Democrats that you're not going to win. We're not going to win big in the midterms, or the kind of blue wave that people are talking about, by just saying we're not them, we're not him. They're going to have to offer a viable alternative, and they're going to have to try to offer, I think, some realistic goals around things they can actually accomplish. Because I think the most important thing right now is, will Americans trust Democrats that we can deliver on what we say? Because right now they don't trust either party very much.
Mark, are you worried, though, because we're not just talking about a midterm election here, right? Because the way European allies are talking right now, both publicly, I speak to a number of them every day, is that this is doing long-term damage to U.S. national security partnerships built up over decades, and that you can't turn this back.
Well, you can't. I do think that Trump is an anomaly, and I do think that there's an understanding of that. But certainly I think it hurts the long-term relationships. But yeah, I think that, again, Greenland is offering us what we want. So it's hard to understand why. I know the president often believes he gets more leverage by taking an extreme position and thinking he'll get a better deal, but they're already giving him the deal.
But again, Americans are saying, when you're talking about Greenland, you're not talking about me, you're not talking about my healthcare costs, you're not talking about our lives. And to some degree, why are you making fights around the world when you could be fighting for us right here at home?
Well, we'll see what they say in November. Mark,
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks so much.